The screen of my old laptop illuminated the cramped kitchen of my parents' house, the clock in the corner ticking past 1:40 a.m. My fingers didn't shake as I typed in the final numbers. I wasn't stealing. I was simply redistributing capital that would have otherwise sat idle in a bank account while 8 brides waited for cakes I couldn't bake without proper equipment. The total for the 3 commercial deck ovens came to $22,000. When the status bar flickered and changed to transaction approved, a sudden rush of oxygen filled my lungs. It was the thrill of a real entrepreneur making a hard, necessary executive decision. Chloe? I didn't flinch. I smoothly lowered the screen halfway, cutting the glare, and turned to face the doorway. Marcus stood there in his gray sweatpants, rubbing his eyes, looking exactly like the cautious, small-town accountant he was. "What are you doing up so late, babe?" he muttered, his voice thick with sleep. "Just solving the cash flow puzzle for the launch." I offered him my most reassuring professional smile. I stood up, walked over, and gently wrapped my arms around his neck, breathing in the familiar scent of his laundry detergent. "Go back to bed. I've got everything under control." He kissed my forehead, completely oblivious to the fact that his future had just been unlocked. 2 weeks later, I stood in the middle of Liam's workshop. The air was thick with sawdust and the loud, annoying roar of his heavy machinery. Liam stood a few paces behind me, holding his breath, looking terrified of his own shadow. I didn't look at the half-finished dining tables. I looked at the high concrete ceilings and the massive grid of natural light pouring through the north windows. It was perfect. It was exactly what my boutique bakery needed to look high-end. "We'll have to tear those pipes down," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the hum of his router. I pointed my manicured finger toward his dust collection system. "The cake-tasting tables will go right here, by the windows. The light is beautiful." Liam shut down the machine. The sudden silence in the warehouse was sharp, heavy, and defensive. He stared at me like I was a stranger. "Chloe, what are you talking about?" I walked past his lumber racks and set my designer purse directly onto the freshly sanded wood of his workbench. It was time he understood the reality of the situation. "My wedding cake boutique," I said, keeping my tone perfectly calm, professional, and logical. "Marcus and I have been looking at commercial rents downtown, and they're ridiculous. Then I remembered your place. You're just cutting timber here, Liam. A luxury bakery needs a proper storefront, and it makes 0 sense for you to hoard this entire ground floor just for yourself." Liam stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, waiting for a punchline that was never going to come. He looked so small standing next to his massive machines, his face covered in a fine layer of gray dust. "You're joking," he said. "I'm entirely serious," I replied, softening my voice. I used the exact same patient, measured tone our parents always used whenever they had to help him understand how the world worked. "You can move your saws and wood piles down to the basement. It's a bit damp, sure, but you're just cutting raw timber, Liam. A luxury bakery needs presentation. It needs foot traffic." He didn't look at the big picture. He didn't think about how a high-end bakery would elevate the entire property value, or how my branding would bring affluent clients directly to his doorstep. He just looked at his tools. "I'm not moving my business into a damp basement because you want a free storefront, Chloe," he said, his voice flat and stubborn. "The answer is no." The sheer ingratitude of it hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat, and the professional warmth I had carefully maintained dissolved into pure, hot frustration. "You are so incredibly selfish, Liam," I said, stepping closer to his workbench, my hands clenching into fists. "Marcus and I are trying to build a future here. Family is supposed to help family, but you'd rather keep your precious sawdust than see your own sister succeed." He didn't even argue. He just stood there, rooted to the floor like one of his stupid logs. "Let's go," I snapped at Marcus, turning sharply on my heel. I marched toward the heavy steel side door, my heels clicking loudly against the concrete floor. I slammed the door behind me so hard the metal frame rattled. Marcus hurried after me, his face pale and panicked, whispering apologies to Liam that my brother didn't deserve to hear. We got into the car, and the silence in the front seat was deafening. I stared out the passenger window at the gritty industrial street. My chest heaved. I wasn't angry because I had lost. I was angry because my own blood had looked me in the eye and treated my dream like an inconvenience. He didn't understand the pressure I was under. He didn't know about the $22,000 already sitting in the equipment supplier's bank account, or the 8 brides expecting their tasting appointments. I couldn't just back down. If Liam wouldn't listen to logic, I would have to use a language he actually understood. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen as I dialed our mother's number. As the line began to ring, I let out a ragged, trembling sob, letting the tears finally spill over my eyelashes. Liam thought this was a private disagreement between 2 siblings. He forgot that in our family, a threat to my happiness was a communal emergency. By 7 a.m. the next morning, the chess pieces were already moving. I sat in bed, sipping my coffee, listening to the muffled, frantic sound of my mother's voice leaking from Liam's phone miles away. I knew exactly what she was saying because I had spent 3 hours the previous night weeping into her shoulder, painting a vivid picture of my brother's cold, unprovoked cruelty. "Family helps family," she would be telling him, using the exact phrase that had always cleared obstacles for me since we were kids. When my dad texted me a screenshot of his brief message to Liam, "Your mother is upset. Call your sister and find a compromise," I knew the ground was shaking beneath my brother's feet. But Liam remained stubbornly silent. He didn't call, he didn't text. He thought he could just build a wall of silence around his workshop and wait me out. He underestimated my stamina. I didn't engage with him directly. Instead, I began a quiet, methodical digital campaign. Every few hours, I forwarded links to his phone, articles detailing the brutal inflation of commercial real estate downtown, blogs about brilliant young female entrepreneurs driven to bankruptcy by high overhead costs, and success stories of siblings who shared spaces and became self-made millionaires. I kept the captions short, sharp, and dripping with disappointment. Must be nice to have more space than you know what to do with. By Wednesday, it was time to widen the circle. I set up a baking station in my parents' cramped kitchen, intentionally leaving a flour smudge on my cheek. I had Marcus take a photo of me from a low angle, making the low ceilings look even more suffocating. I posted it to Instagram with a caption I had spent 45 minutes drafting to hit every emotional note perfectly. Working hard in a cramped space, dreaming of the day I can finally open my boutique. It's tough when the people who are supposed to support you the most prefer empty square footage over your happiness. But Marcus and I will keep pushing. Hashtag women in business, hashtag family disappointment. The response was immediate and beautiful. The comment section became a wall of communal sympathy. Aunt Susan called me a sweetie and condemned the selfishness destroying our family. My uncle called Liam directly that evening, genuinely questioning his mental health because refusing to help his own sister start a family business sounded completely erratic. Liam's livelihood wasn't real business anyway, it was a hobby. He was cutting trees, I was building a brand. He couldn't see that his damp basement was a perfectly fine place for heavy saws and piles of raw lumber. He was hoarding a public asset, a family resource, out of pure spite. I stared at the rising like count on my post. Liam was isolated, surrounded by his precious wood and the growing disapproval of everyone who mattered. He was a stubborn man, but nobody could survive the weight of an entire family turning against them. I was giving him a chance to be the savior. If he refused, I would make sure he played the villain perfectly. By Friday afternoon, I decided to give Liam an honorable way out. I convinced Marcus to put on his best suit, and together we walked back into the workshop. I wore my warmest, most professional smile, the one that always made investors and clients feel completely safe. "We came to apologize," I said, my voice soft and sweet. "Liam, I shouldn't have lost my temper last week. Marcus and I spent the week putting together a formal partnership proposal. We want to do this right." Marcus stepped forward and handed him a sleek black folder titled Project Sweetwood, a shared space initiative. It was an incredibly generous offer. We proposed 0 rent for the first 2 years so the bakery could establish cash flow, and an 80-20 utility split, since his heavy saws obviously used more electricity than my ovens. I even offered him complimentary dessert catering for his events and free marketing on my Instagram page. It was a perfect win-win. But Liam didn't even look at the intangibles. He just glanced at the paper and shoved it back into the folder. "Chloe, this isn't a partnership. This is an eviction notice with a bow on it," he said, his face hardening. "You aren't looking at the big picture," I insisted, my jaw tightening as I pulled a professional laser measure from my pocket. "Let's just see how the display cases will look. Marcus, hold the end of this against the lumber rack." "Chloe, stop." I ignored him. I stepped right past his assembly table, sweeping a pile of his hand-drawn blueprint sketches onto the floor to make room for my box of cake display samples. I didn't notice the bottom of the box was sticky with pink buttercream until it left a slight smear across a piece of his raw wood. Suddenly, Liam stepped between me and his machines. His face was dark, and his voice dropped to a terrifying, quiet whisper. "Get your boxes, get your laser, and get out of my building now." Marcus immediately grabbed the folder, his hands shaking. "Chloe, let's go. We should go." "You are an absolute monster, Liam," I hissed, glaring at him before turning toward the door. "I'm telling Mom." In the car, my hands were trembling with pure, unadulterated hatred. He had humiliated me in front of my fiancé. He was actively trying to crush my business career just because he was bigger and stronger than me. I looked down at my bare wrist. I gripped it with my opposite hand, squeezing and twisting the skin with all my might until a faint red mark bloomed across the flesh. I pulled out my phone, angled it under the car's window light, and took a close-up photo. 10 minutes later, it was on Instagram. When a man uses physical intimidation to crush your business dreams because he's bigger than you, bruises heal, but the betrayal doesn't. The internet did the rest. Within hours, over 200 people had liked it. Local wedding planners texted me in a panic, promising to boycott his shop. Liam wanted a war of walls, but I had just turned his own community into his cage. The trap was set for Sunday dinner. I sat at the head of my parents' dining room table, my laptop open and connected to a portable projector aimed at the wall. The plates and food had been pushed to the sideboard. This was no longer a dining room, it was a boardroom. Marcus sat beside me, looking sick, while my parents sat like board members awaiting a crucial merger review. When Liam walked in, he froze. He looked at the empty table, his hand gripping the back of a chair. "You said no talk about the shop, Dad," he said, his voice laced with immediate suspicion. "We lied," I said, flatly, clicking my mouse, "because you won't listen to reason otherwise." The first slide flashed onto the wall: Boutique Bakery Integration and Resource Allocation. I didn't waste time. I launched into a structured, professional presentation about how we were going to optimize his property. I showed floor plans highlighting his underutilized square footage, architectural mock-ups of my beautiful pink logo draped over his drab brick facade, and a financial slide offering him $300 a month starting in year 3. I even pointed out that he'd save money on groceries because I'd leave bakery leftovers in the fridge. My parents nodded in perfect unison, completely aligned with my logic. "Look at the data, Liam," my mother said, gesturing to the slides, showing the horrific commercial rent prices downtown. "It's illogical for you to stay there alone when Chloe is drowning in market costs. This is the only way." But Liam was completely blinded to numbers. He just stood there, stubborn as always. "The answer is still no," he said. "I don't care about your slides, Chloe. You cannot have my building." It was time to force his hand. I clicked to the final slide, showing a timeline chart where the current date was marked as Phase 1, operational handover. "I don't understand," I said, letting my voice drop the professional act, letting the raw desperation show. "We already signed the contract for the commercial kitchen equipment. The deposit is non-refundable, and I quit my job at the franchise yesterday." The room went dead silent. Even my dad looked blindsided, turning to me in shock, but I kept my tear-filled eyes locked on Liam. "I had to," I cried, turning to my parents for support. "The equipment suppliers had a flash sale, and I knew Liam would see the logic once he saw the presentation. The delivery truck arrives at the warehouse on the 15th. My entire future is in your hands, Liam." I waited for the guilt to break him. I waited for him to realize that if he didn't open those doors, he was destroying his own sister. Instead, his face went completely dead calm. "The answer is still no," he said quietly. "If a delivery truck shows up, I am turning it away. If anyone tries to force their way in, I am calling the police." He turned and walked out, leaving me screaming in the echo of my own ruined timeline. The walls were closing in, but I refused to let the dust settle. By Tuesday morning, my phone was a minefield. 8 different brides were blowing up my notifications, demanding updates on their wedding cake tastings. The $22,000 was gone, locked in the supplier's account, and I had no kitchen to show for it. Then came Marcus. He cornered me in the living room, his face pale, holding his phone like a weapon. "Close. The venue planner said Liam boycotted the showcase, and he's telling people he never agreed to the bakery. What is going on?" My heart rattled against my ribs, but my face remained an absolute mask of calm. "Liam is just throwing a tantrum, babe," I said, my voice smooth, defensive. "He's panicked about the transition. You know how he gets when things change." "But he told the family he'd call the police," Marcus insisted, his voice cracking with the terror of a man who lived by spreadsheets and rules. "We can't just show up with a delivery truck if he's threatening legal action." He didn't see the vision. He was letting a little friction ruin our entire future. If Marcus lost faith, the whole tower would collapse. I needed proof. I needed a reality that aligned with my goals. So I created one. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I took my old, deactivated smartphone from the closet drawer. I saved my current number under the name Liam in its contacts. Then, sitting in the dark, I began a long, detailed conversation with myself. "I'm sorry about Sunday," I typed from the fake Liam. "The pressure is just getting to me. You can have the space, Chloe. Just don't make me look bad in front of Mom and Dad. Let's do the move quickly at night so we avoid a scene." I replied to it, creating a perfect, harmonious narrative of sibling reconciliation. When I finished, I took screenshots of the chat, transferred them to my new phone, and deleted the originals. The next morning, I slid the screen under Marcus's nose while he drank his coffee. "See?" I whispered, kissing his cheek. "I told you he just needed time to process the data. He wants us to move in quietly. It's a done deal." The relief on Marcus's face was pathetic, but it gave me exactly what I needed. Later that afternoon, I drove over to my parents' house. I sat on the couch with my mother, letting my head rest on her shoulder until she willingly handed over her old brass emergency key to the warehouse. "Just use it to get the kitchen set up before he changes his mind," she whispered, patting my hand. Holding that cold piece of metal in my palm, the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Liam's stubborn words at the dinner table didn't matter anymore. The text messages on my phone proved he wanted to help me. My mother's key proved I had permission. I wasn't breaking the law. I was just executing the contract my brother was too weak to finish himself. The warehouse alleyway was dead quiet at 2 a.m. when the box truck idled to a halt. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and exhaust. I stood by the heavy steel side door, my breath forming tiny plumes of mist in the dim yellow glow of the street lamp. I didn't hesitate. I slid my mother's old brass key into the lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. As the door swung open, revealing the cavernous, dark interior of Liam's workshop, a profound sense of justice washed over me. I wasn't an intruder. I was a tenant executing a necessary relocation strategy. "All right," I whispered, turning to the 3 hired movers shivering behind me. "Let's move quickly. Be careful with my equipment." We flipped the breaker, and the overhead industrial lights flared to life, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete floor. My mother stepped inside right behind me, wrapping her coat tightly around her shoulders, nodding in quiet approval. She was here to witness the family finally being made whole. Liam's workspace was an absolute mess of masculine hoarding. Giant, overpriced machines and massive slabs of premium walnut lumber took up 70% of the floor. It was incredibly inefficient. Get that big router out of the way first, I instructed, pointing a dapper finger toward his $15,000 CNC machine. Push it down the basement stairs. The bakery counter needs to sit right here by the north windows. The movers grunted, grabbing the heavy metal frame of the router. They didn't bother unbolting it properly. As they shoved it forcefully toward the stairs, a brutal, screeching sound echoed through the warehouse. The sharp steel base tore deep, jagged gouges into Liam's pristine concrete floor. My mother winced slightly at the noise, but I didn't care. Floors could be repaired. Wood could be moved. My business could not wait. Next went the lumber. The men dragged his precious walnut slabs across the room, dumping them carelessly into the damp, dark corner near the basement stairwell to clear the main floor. Then came the real victory. The movers wheeled in my 3 massive stainless steel commercial deck ovens. They gleamed brilliantly under the industrial lights, looking magnificent against the raw brick walls. I stood in the center of the room, my clipboard pressed against my chest, mapping out the future. This wasn't a crime, it was an upgrade. I was replacing dirt, noise, and sawdust with sweetness, elegance, and commerce. Liam would see the beauty of it in the morning. He would see his heavy machinery safely stored downstairs, my beautiful kitchen established upstairs, and he would finally understand that I had saved us both. I looked up at the high ceiling, a small, triumphant smile breaking across my face. I felt completely invincible. The brides would get their cakes, the brand would launch, and the family would be proud. I had won. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the north windows 20 minutes later, painting my beautiful new kitchen in a chaotic, rhythmic glare. 2 police cruisers blocked the alleyway. I didn't panic. I smoothed down my skirt, picked up my clipboard, and walked toward the entrance to greet the officers. Liam had obviously called them in a childish fit of rage, but I had the data to put this to rest. "Officers, thank God you're here!" My mother rushed forward, her voice trembling as she tried to explain the family arrangement. I stepped in front of her, offering the lead officer my most professional smile. "There's no emergency here. This is a minor family transition. My brother Liam owns the building, but we've agreed to a shared initiative." I flipped open my clipboard, thrusting my neatly printed PowerPoint slides and the fake text messages into his face. "See, we have an operational handover scheduled tonight." The officer didn't even look at the slides. He looked past my shoulder at the gouged concrete floor, the displaced machinery, and the movers holding a stainless steel counter. "Ma'am, the owner called from Chicago. He wants everyone out, and he is pressing charges for criminal trespass and property damage. Tell your men to put the equipment back in the truck or they're going to jail." "You can't do this!" I screamed, the clipboard slipping from my fingers and clattering onto the ruined floor. "The contract is non-refundable. I have 8 weddings next month." They didn't care about my career. They watched like prison guards as the movers hauled my beautiful deck ovens right back out into the damp, dark alleyway, leaving them on the curb under a cheap plastic tarp. My mother was handed a criminal trespass citation, weeping openly as she led me out to the car. The next 48 hours were an absolute betrayal. The equipment supplier repossessed the ovens when I couldn't pay the remaining balance. Then the brides found out. They banded together. Their frantic messages turned into a collective threat of a civil fraud lawsuit. But the final dagger didn't come from the police or the clients. It came from Marcus. He met me at a diner across town, his bags already packed in the back of his car. He didn't look at me with love anymore. He looked at me with disgust. He had called Liam. He knew about the fake text messages, and he knew about the 8 deposits. "I can't marry a thief, Chloe," he said, his voice entirely dead, as he slid his wedding ring onto the table and walked out. Now I sit alone in my parents' cramped kitchen, the silence suffocating me. My brother has blocked our numbers and turned his workshop into an iron fortress. Everyone calls him the victim, but they are all blind. I didn't fail because my logic was flawed. I failed because a jealous brother, a weak fiancé, and a broken system conspired to crush a woman who dared to have a dream.
They think they've locked me out, but this isn't over.